Gospel of Luke was written after the cataclysmic events of 70 CE, when the Romans utterly destroyed Jerusalem, the Jewish temple, and thousands of Jewish people. In the First Jewish-Roman War, this passage today reflects the depth of the tragedy that these events represented to the Jewish community and the earliest Christians as they struggled to find hope in the midst of abject annihilation. Yet, from this abyss, the readers of Luke's good news look forward to redemption from all that befalls the world around them. That is our scholarly introduction to this passage. But I invite you now to think with your heart and your mind about the people of Ukraine and what they are experiencing as you listen to the words of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verses 23 through 28. Hear the ancient voices. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. For there will be great distress on the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be taken away as captives among all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth, distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing nigh. Here ends the reading. For our sermon today, I would like to focus on just that last verse, verse 28 from the 21st chapter of the Gospel of Luke. Now, when these things begin to take place, stand up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Redemption is a prominent concept in both the Hebrew and Christian texts and faith. There are 202 occurrences of some form of the word redeem. Redeem, redeemed, redeemer, and redemption. The dictionary defines redeem as follows: to regain possession of something in exchange for payment. Now, most of us know the concept of redemption from the ubiquitous stamp on every bottle and can that we use, CACRV, or California Redemption Value, 5 cents. However, in ancient Israel, the concept of redemption was liberally applied to many aspects of daily life, and was critical to the religious system, particularly the priesthood. The first part of everything belonged to God in their concept of faith in Israel. And the priests were God's collection agents. So, the first harvest of the crop, the first collection from the vines, and the first fruit from the trees, the firstborn of every animal, all these first belonged to God, and they would be given to the priests. But also, the firstborn child of every couple belonged to God. Now, the crop, the animals, the wine, and the fruit, people would hand over to the priests because the priests had no land to farm. And this is how they sustained themselves and sustained the operations of the temple and the ceremonies for the worship of God. But the firstborn children of every family were not handed over, but had to be redeemed, bought back with money, rather than handing over their child. And so they would give an offering of money to the priests as a symbolic redemption of their firstborn child. Okay, that's sweet. Buy back your child from God. Well, it was kind of a step up from the child sacrifice to a God that many religions practiced. So I'd rather they were able to buy back the child from their God. The most famous redemption in Israelite history was when God redeemed the whole of Israel. The whole people of Israel were redeemed and rescued from Egypt. And as the story goes, the final plague against the Egyptians was when the firstborn of every Egyptian family was struck dead, and even the firstborn of the Pharaoh. However, for the Jews, the Hebrews, who marked their doorpost with the blood of the Lamb, the angel of death would pass over their homes and spare the firstborn of the Hebrews. And that is the origin of the celebration of the Passover. But when the Pharaoh's own firstborn child was struck dead by the plague, then Pharaoh finally released the Hebrew people to leave Egypt and to go into the wilderness to worship God. And so redemption in the Bible is a very important concept. But redemption as a practice is not always so heroic. Another major category of human beings beyond the firstborn that were also often redeemed were those who were enslaved. Enslaved persons could be redeemed, set free for money, if there was someone who could come and redeem them. Slavery is an institution as old as humanity. It is one of the great achievements of modernity, of human civilization, that we have eliminated legal enslavement in most of our world. But it has a stubborn and ugly history, and did not go quietly into that good night. Slavery only ended in the 19th century, a little over 100 years ago, here in the United States. And it took the bloodiest war the nation ever fought, a civil war no less, to bring this heinous institution to an end on this continent. Europe had ended this international slave trade and slavery on the European continent before the United States. Now, I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but the truth must be told in this Black History Month, if in no other month of the year. As we know, there are some states in the United States passing laws that make it illegal to teach anything about race that makes white kids uncomfortable, embarrassed, or otherwise perturbed about their white heritage. So, by that standard, Black History Month is next to be banned, right behind all the books on race that are being removed from libraries from Texas to Florida and states across this country. Now, those of you who were part of our anti-racist book club last year will remember that we learned by reading the book, White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity, a book that I'm sure is next to be banned. And in that book, it was documented the way that Christianity and the Bible were used to justify slavery as consistent with Christian faith. Well, I've got news for you. They weren't just making that up. The Bible and Christianity, in many ways, lend themselves willingly to the support of slavery. Let me share a passage from the Bible with you. From Leviticus chapter 25, 39 to 49, which reads, "If any who are dependent on you become so impoverished that they sell themselves to you, you shall not make them serve as slaves. They shall remain with you as hired or bound laborers. They shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children with them shall be free from your authority. They shall go back to their own family and return to their ancestral property. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over them with harshness, but shall fear your God. As for the male and female slaves whom you may have, it is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves. You may also acquire them from among the aliens residing with you, and from their families that are with you, who have been born in your land. And they may be your property. You may keep them as a possession for your children after you, for them to inherit as property. These you may treat as slaves. But as for your fellow Israelites, no one shall rule over them with harshness. If resident aliens among you prosper, and if any of your kin fall into difficulty with one of them, and sell themselves to an alien or to a branch of the alien's family, after they have sold themselves, they shall have the right of redemption. One of their brothers may redeem them, or their uncle's son may redeem them, or any one of their family who is their own flesh may redeem them. As a black person, I cannot read these words from my Bible without feeling pain, anguish, and despair as I think of my ancestors who were enslaved by good Christian folk who were some of your ancestors. There is no law that has ever considered the pain that black students feel learning American history. So I don't see why white kids should get the protection of the law to prevent them from having any psychological angst or emotional qualms about their ancestors' behavior in the centuries prior to the end of slavery. That's a clear example of white privilege. We will pass a law to make sure your children don't feel uncomfortable. And it's not just the Hebrew scriptures. Hear this from the Christian texts, the first letter of Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 through 23. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution as supreme, or of governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. It's reported that Howard Thurman, the great theologian, whose grandmother was born in slavery, forbade him to read the Bible to her from any of these passages. What's even more remarkable about these Christian passages is that enslaved African Americans actually adopted this religion of Christianity. Now, maybe some thought that the rule in Leviticus that precluded Jews from enslaving fellow Jews might prevent Christians from enslaving other Christians. And for a time, that worked in some places. But alas, profit from enslavement trumped Christian faith by a long shot. But the enslaved African Americans did not swallow the enslaver's Christian faith whole. No, they took it apart and revised it and reformed it into the good news of liberation that it was intended to be and that they needed it to be. Marcus Borg, the great progressive Christian theologian and scholar, in his first book, the classic Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time, a book that I invite you to read with me during Lent. We're going to have a Lenten book club that will read Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. We'll be sending out details about that this coming week. In his book, he concludes by offering 3 lenses through which to see the meaning of Jesus and the meaning of the Christian life. He says that the meaning of Jesus, and therefore the Christian life, can be understood by the 3 major themes of the Hebrew Bible. Those themes are the Exodus, the exile, and the institution of the priesthood. Taking them up in reverse order, the priestly lens sees Jesus as the priest who makes sacrifices so that God will forgive and accept the people who have sinned. Jesus himself is the priest, and he is the sacrifice. Through that lens, we live the Christian life as one of sacrifice on behalf of others. The exile lens sees Jesus as the light of the world that shows the way back from exile in a foreign land and to our home with God. This understanding of Jesus would give us an understanding of the Christian life as an evangelical life, showing lost souls the way back to God. But it is the Exodus lens that focuses on God's deliverance, and seeing Jesus through this lens, one sees Jesus as the liberator of those who are enslaved by evil people and evil powers. And when you see Jesus as the liberator, then you understand the Christian life as a life that sets one free to set others free. And this is the lens through which African Americans read and understood the Christian faith, and continue to read and see the Christian faith to this day. That is why, after the enslaved African Americans were required to sit in the enslavers' worship on Sunday mornings, they would steal away into the wilderness, down by the riverside, and read the Exodus story, and hear the words of Moses, "The God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, and God said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their enslavers. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians." That's why the enslavers punished any enslaved person who learned to read. But learn to read they did, and learn to preach they did, and learn to love Jesus the liberator they did, and get free they did. So even in the midst of suffering, pain, and unimaginable agony endured during enslavement, they heard the words of hope, faith, and freedom in the Bible they read. And I believe that while others might have lost hope and succumbed to the despair that was the truest chain of slavery, when they heard the words in the 21st chapter of Luke, they did just what the Bible said. They lifted up their heads so they could see their redemption coming. And they knew that the God of the Israelites who freed them from Pharaoh, and that the God of Jesus who freed him from the Roman cross and the borrowed tomb, was the same God that would free them from Pharaoh in Alabama and redeem them from slavery and set them free to worship God, just like the children of Israel. And yes, God drowned Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, and God drowned Robert E. Lee's army in the Mississippi River. And they, the enslaved, were able to walk through to freedom across the river just like dry land, just like the children of Israel. And that's a God worth worshiping. And that's a Jesus worth following. And that's a Christian life worth living. One that is focused on nothing less than freedom and redemption for all of God's children. Let the people of God say, amen.